On Tuesday, March 24, 2015, an Airbus operated by Germanwings was en route from Düsseldorf to Barcelona. During the flight, in the captain's absence, the co-pilot made remarkable changes to the set altitude. He adjusted the aircraft's selected altitude to 100 feet for 3 seconds, escalated to its maximum of 49,000 feet, and then finally settled back at 35,000 feet. It seemed as if the co-pilot was trying something out, something he would do again on the return flight, this time with fatal consequences. Despite these adjustments in altitude settings, the engaged autopilot modes meant that these changes did not alter the aircraft's descent path after the captain returned to the cockpit. The flight resumed its normal course, eventually making a smooth landing at Barcelona airport. The aircraft then made its way back to the gate. Shortly after, 144 new passengers boarded the aircraft, while the crew, composed of 6 individuals, stayed unchanged. The captain on this flight was 34-year-old Patrick Sondheimer, a German national with almost 7,000 flying hours. Of these, more than 3,800 hours were logged on the Airbus, A320, with 259 of those hours. As a captain for this flight, he was assigned to be the pilot monitoring. The co-pilot, 27-year-old Andreas Lubitz, also from Germany, had logged more than 900 flying hours. With 540 of those hours on the A320, Andreas was the pilot flying for this journey. From a young age, he had a lifelong dream of becoming a pilot. At the age of 14, he joined the local gliding club, where he obtained his gliding license. 2 years later, however, this wasn't enough to satisfy his passion for the skies. On September 1st, 2008, he started his basic training at the Lufthansa Flight Training Pilot School in Bremen. Unknown to many in his life, Andreas began experiencing significant struggles. He developed severe depression and insomnia. At one point, he even contemplated suicide. Seeking help, he consulted a psychiatrist. Alongside therapy and relaxation techniques, Andreas was prescribed an antidepressant. He had to halt his pilot training because his medical certificate was not revalidated by the Lufthansa Aeromedical Center. This decision was due to his condition and the medical treatment he was receiving. A few months later, Andreas's mental health showed significant improvement, something his psychiatrist confirmed. Yet despite this progress, a setback occurred on July 14th, 2009, when his request to renew his medical certificate was denied, prompting the Lufthansa to notify the LBA. Just 2 weeks later, Andreas was granted a new Class 1 medical certificate, allowing him to finally return to pilot school. This certificate was valid for 1 year, but came with a critical condition. It would be revoked if he suffered a relapse into depression. After passing his ATPL written exam, he continued his training at the Airline Training Center in Phoenix, Arizona, stretching from late 2010 into early 2011. His ambition didn't stop at flying. He also served as a flight attendant for Lufthansa for over 2 years, simultaneously continuing his pilot training. His skill and determination led to successfully obtaining his A320 type rating in Munich by late 2013, and he soon joined Germanwings. By June 2014, he passed his proficiency check and became a co-pilot. Throughout his training and evaluations, Andreas consistently impressed his instructors and examiners, who considered his professional performance to be above standard. In late 2014, Andreas's mental health worsened, with vision and sleep issues, prompting him to consult several private physicians. By early 2015, he had received sick leave certificates and medication for a psychosomatic and anxiety disorder. He was referred for psychiatric treatment due to suspected psychosis, and additional medications, including sleeping aids, were prescribed shortly thereafter. Because of patient confidentiality, Germanwings didn't know about Andreas's problems. He kept flying and no one knew about his condition. At 9 good local time, Germanwings Flight 9, 5 took off from Barcelona Airport, Spain, flying back to Düsseldorf Airport, Germany. As it climbed, the aircraft soared above the city of Barcelona. Before entering Germany, the flight path from Barcelona to Düsseldorf crosses the Mediterranean Sea and the French Alps. This flight usually lasts 2 hours and 15 minutes. After about 30 minutes of climbing, the aircraft reached its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet, settling into a steady flight path toward its destination. The information supplied by Météo France shows that at flight level 3, or Tassat, the aircraft was flying in clear skies with some clouds. at about 32,000 feet. The wind from the southwest was at about 40 knots. Direct Airmar Merci. Germanwings 18 Golf. At almost 9:30, the captain acknowledged the air traffic. Controllers clearance to fly directly to the Airmar point. At this juncture, the aircraft departed Spanish airspace and entered France tragically. This marked the last communication between the flight crew and air traffic control. The Airmar point is a designated waypoint in aviation, marking a precise geographic location that assists pilots in navigating their flight path. It serves as a critical reference for air traffic control, particularly during transitions between airspace sectors. Like other waypoints, it is typically marked by a combination of letters and numbers. I'm going to the bathroom. Can you take over radio communications? Yes, sure. After the captain exited the cockpit, the co-pilot switched the cockpit door control to the locked position. This setting prevented the crew from opening the door, using the emergency access keypad for a predetermined period. Just 30 seconds after the captain's departure, the co-pilot adjusted the altitude from 38,000 feet to 100 feet something. He had also executed on the flight to Barcelona. However, this time it led to fatal consequences. Following this, the autopilot was set to open descent mode and the auto thrust to idle, initiating the aircraft's immediate descent. 2 minutes later, he switched the speed management from managed to selected mode. This shift allowed the co-pilot to manually set the target speed, which he adjusted to 308 knots. As a result, the aircraft's speed increased, with the descent rate fluctuating between 17 feet per minute and 5,000 feet per minute. At that moment, no one on board of the aircraft was aware that it had begun to descend. However, the Marseille Control Center observed that the aircraft's altitude had dropped nearly 2,000 feet below its assigned cruise level and was continuing to descend. In response, Marseille attempted to establish communication with the aircraft to confirm its altitude clearance. Germanwings Marseille Control What cruise level were you cleared for? There was no answer from the co-pilot. Marseille Control Center tried to contact the crew on a different frequency. Germanwings Marseille Please confirm what cruise level you are cleared for. But the co-pilot didn't respond. Germanwings Marseille Control Center. What cruise level were you cleared for? Germanwings Marseille Control Center. What cruise level were you cleared for? The controller attempted to reach the flight crew 3 additional times within 30 seconds, but the co-pilot did not respond. Meanwhile, the selected speed was adjusted to 323 knots, causing the aircraft's speed to increase again within minutes. The aircraft descended approximately 10,000 feet. Shortly after the speed adjustment, a buzzer sounded outside the cockpit, signaling the captain's attempt to re-enter. The co-pilot wasn't giving any reaction. The Marseille Control Center continued to attempt contact with the crew, but received no response. The co-pilot remained silent, yet the controller could hear his breathing. He sounded calm. Andreas was in full control. He adjusted the speed to 350 knots. Marking the aircraft's maximum operating speed. The captain tried to call the first officer on the intercom 4 times, but the co-pilot did not respond. Realizing that the co-pilot was not going to open the door, the captain faced the grim reality of the situation. Open the door, open the door, open the door, let me in. Following the events of 2001, cockpit security was increased to prevent hijackings. The cockpit door, now bulletproof, separates the cockpit from the cabin. Entry requires a standard code with an emergency code. For situations like crew incapacitation, however, pilots can override this by setting the door control to lock, thereby blocking entry from anyone outside the cockpit. It was precisely this mechanism that the co-pilot exploited to permanently lock access to the cockpit as the aircraft began its descent with the door locked. The captain was unable to re-enter the cockpit. The captain looked through the windows and saw that the aircraft was descending rapidly. He resorted to using an emergency axe to access the cockpit. Despite his efforts, the cockpit door remained impenetrable. Panic spread among the passengers when they saw and heard the captain shouting to get the door open. The captain's urgent cries made everyone realize something was very wrong, causing fear to sweep through the cabin. Open the goddamn door. Open the door. Now let me in. The Marseille Control Center, along with an air traffic controller from the French air defense system, attempted to establish contact with the flight crew, but never received a response. Furthermore, the flight crew of another aircraft tried to reach out to them, but they had no success. Germanwings must say control center. Please answer. A French military jet was dispatched from the Orange Carrot Air Base in a rapid attempt to intercept the aircraft. However, the situation had already escalated to a critical point. The aircraft had descended below 7,000 feet, with the mountains looming closer, triggering the activation of the ground proximity warning system. Terrain ahead, open the door now. Terrain ahead, open the door, pull up. Siren ahead, open the door. Siren ahead, open the door now. Seconds later, Germanwings Flight 952 tragically crashed into the French Alps, resulting in the loss of 150 lives from 21 different countries. Among the victims were 16 exchange students. Part of a class of 40, only 16 spots had been available for this trip. The local fire department, civil protection rescue services, and police were all dispatched immediately, but the crash site was almost impossible to reach due to its terrain, with the walk taking more than 3 hours. Most personnel had to fly in by helicopter. It was immediately apparent that there were no survivors a few days following the crash. A vigil took place in the Swiss Alps. Families released balloons into the sky, one for each victim. Let's take a moment of silence for them. Before we continue with the investigation part, on March 26th, 2 days after Flight 9525 crashed, Lufthansa CEO Carsten Spohr addressed a room full of cameras and families. The black box had been recovered and analyzed, finally shedding light on what exactly happened. During the press conference, Carsten Spohr stated, "We are deeply saddened and in total disbelief to announce that the co-pilot deliberately crashed the aircraft, not even in our worst nightmares. Could we have imagined that such a tragedy would happen in our very own company?" A search of Andreas Lubitz's home uncovered a hidden notification of illness. On the day of the accident, the pilot was suffering from a psychiatric disorder, possibly a psychotic depressive episode, and was taking psychotropic medication, making him unfit to fly. Neither the airline nor his colleagues were aware of his condition. Additionally, investigators found diary entries and an online search history. His searches covered topics such as painless poisons, methods to induce blindness, overdosing on antidepressants, death by petrol, and details about the locking mechanism of the Airbus A320 cockpit door. Lufthansa took immediate action to provide compensation to the families of the victims, continuing their support with further assistance in the months that followed. In response to the tragedy, important safety recommendations were proposed. After the tragedy, aviation authorities proposed a series of safety measures to enhance aviation security and provide better support for pilots. These measures initially introduced a temporary two-person rule in the cockpit, which was subsequently revoked. Recommendations also included conducting psychological evaluations for pilots, implementing random drug and alcohol testing, and ensuring stricter oversight of aeromedical examiners. Additionally, there was a call for better privacy rules to make it easier to share medical information and for setting up a European database for aeromedical data. The last recommendation was the implementation of support and reporting systems. It was determined that one of the reasons Andreas may not have reported his worsening depression was the fear of losing his job and facing financial repercussions. Therefore, support networks needed to be established to make it easier for pilots to seek help and make informed decisions about their mental health without fear of negative consequences. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Captain Patrick Sondenheimer's wife founded a foundation in his memory, committed to assisting children and young individuals in navigating through grief and crisis. He dedicated his final moments to courageously trying to save the aircraft and its passengers.